Welcome to the Chronic Report. Today, we are going to talk with my colleague and friend, Dr. Patrick Lynch, and we're going to find out all about what led Patrick to doing the Chronic Report, and learn a little bit about some of his protocols for helping people with chronic illness. Good afternoon, Patrick. How are you doing?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, this is a has been a really great series so far. We've had some pretty interesting interviews, wouldn't you say?
It's been awesome. Yeah, the doctors that we have interviewed, this first series has been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more. And I think today is going to be really fun as well and interesting and informative for our audience. Um, I know you pretty well, and I think you're a pretty cool guy. And I've learned a ton from you about chronic illness since I have worked with you with my own illness with Lyme disease and then working on this project. And I'm really excited to share that information today. So, Patrick, why don't we start from the beginning and let's talk a little bit about how you decided to pursue Oriental medicine and infectious disease. How did you become an infectious disease specialist? And did they happen together, or was that an evolution?
Wow. Well, I think that we could probably talk a couple hours on just that question alone.
Yeah.
Getting I developed an interest in Oriental medicine when I was about 19. And that's a little bit of a story in itself. I went to a military school for my high school years, and I got kind of thrown out into society, when I was 18 years old into a little town called Ashland, Oregon, which is a pretty, it's just a cool small town that's, you know, um, it's just kind of like an outdoorsy town. And, before I moved to Ashland, I was in a military establishment. I wore uniforms every day, had a haircut every other week. We had to wear starched clothes, shine brass shoes. We had a regimen, and we didn't have much freedom. And so I didn't really know who I was. And so when I entered society after graduating from military school, I needed to find out who I was. And, I recognized throughout life, I was interested, I was more interested in what's going on behind the veil of everything that we see, feel, and hear. And I was more interested in things that people just don't talk about on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And so that's where I put my energy. And, I put my energy there, I put my practice there, I put my development there, even though, I had graduated from military school and now I'm in a college setting and I'm going to the library. And instead of, doing my homework in the library or, researching for class in the library, I would research stuff like this, like what is intuition? What does it mean to cultivate your chi? And then that led me to Qigong, which led me to yoga, which led me to meditation, which led me to, the science of acupuncture and so that's kind of how I got started. And in regards to becoming an infectious disease specialist, this happened later on in life. I dropped out of college when I was about 19 years old for a good, I would say, 22 years, 23 years or so. I was a painting contractor, and I wanted to learn about myself, and I just wasn't ready to go to college at a young age. So I dropped out, started painting houses, and made enough money to figure out who I was and enjoy life. And I found that I was really into the outdoors, snowboarding, mountain biking, mountain climbing, yoga, meditation, being healthy, and everything that entails, traveling, and so forth.
Hmm.
And then I got married and had a kid, and I realized, well, okay, it's time to do something different. And I went to school to get my undergraduate degree, to finish my undergraduate degree in Ashland, Oregon, finally. and taught yoga and meditation there while I went to school. Um, and I graduated in 2012 and I started developing chronic symptoms. And while I was in my undergrad year, and I was just kind of like, well, what's going on here? I got intermittent dizziness. I got, intermittent episodes of severe back pain. Had some severe back issues. Um, I had some, brain fog, short-term memory loss, and uh, just I had some histamine reactions, like chronic sinusitis that would come up. And I would have these sneezing fits on a daily basis where I would sneeze like 10,000 times.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, what's going on here? I'm a health nut. I'm a yoga practitioner, and here I am. I'm starting to go down a little bit.
Mhm.
And then I realized I learned how to manage my symptoms, and I realized that I had some food sensitivities. So, I kind of stayed away from those things and learned how to manage my symptoms. And then I got into grad school, and then the stress started increasing significantly in this medical program for
Mhm.
um, Oriental medicine, acupuncture and Oriental medicine. And, granted, it was a pretty awesome program, but it was stressful.
Mhm.
And, I had a family, I have a wife and a son, and that I'm raising at the same time. And I got an injury snowboarding one day, and it was a pretty, uh, pretty bad injury. And
Mhm.
so I get injured, and then I have this stressful situation happen at school, and um, which was just just a I don't know, school was hard.
Right.
So, um, and at any rate, and so I went to go do yoga one day, and then 24 hours later, I wind up in the hospital with a bowel obstruction. And
Wow.
yeah, I was like, and I don't know if anybody knows what a bowel obstruction is, but there's nothing really obstructing the bowel many times in this case, but it's when the bowel stops functioning.
Mhm.
No bowel sounds, there's no peristalsis. And so everything becomes inflamed and it feels like somebody's dumping hot lava into your abdomen. It was
Mhm.
extremely painful. And so I went to the hospital and I'm telling the doctors, I'm like, you know, this is weird. I don't know why this is happening, what's going on, but I think it has to do with doing yoga the previous day because I did some
Mhm.
back bends, and after I did some back bends, I could feel my abdomen start to light up.
Mhm.
And so, I'm not going to talk about our conversation or my conversation with the doctors, but that was pretty goofy. And
Yeah.
then I realized, after I was in the hospital for a few days that I knew I needed to stay away from doing yoga and doing exercise and eating really clean because
Mhm.
if I ate anything that metabolizes a polysaccharide, my symptoms, my abdominal symptoms would increase. I would get these sharp shooting pains throughout my body.
Mhm.
Brain fog would get worse. I had a lot of symptoms at that time. And so, I think a month went by or so. And after eating super clean and after being pretty still and feeling good, looking good, I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to do some yoga again or test it out. And
Right.
so I did. And I did some gentle yoga, maybe 4 sun salutations, that were, pretty gentle. And then sure enough, the next day I wind up in the hospital again
Mhm.
telling the doctor, I said, "Hey, look, yeah, I mean, the pain was excruciating."
Right.
And and uh and the doctor was like, I tell the doctor, I said, "Well, I know that yoga triggered this because I
Mhm.
didn't do anything. And the moment I did yoga, I'm back here."
Mhm.
She's like, "Oh no, that's all in your head. Yoga had nothing to do with it." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Look, I know it's not the problem, but it triggered the problem to happen." And she's like, "No,
Mhm.
no, that's all in your head." And I'm like, okay. So I get out of the hospital. 6 weeks go by. I do the same thing. I get tired of not being able to use my body again. So I'm just like, all right, I'm just either going to kill myself or I'm going to blast through this. And
Mhm.
I knew it was stupid, but I don't know why I did it. It was just part of the experience. So
Mhm.
I did about 45 minutes worth of power yoga.
Mm.
Uh, I did some pull-ups on my pull-up bar out back behind my house. I rode my bike to school, which was 8 miles, and just hauled ass and was feeling good on my bike. I was just like, oh my God, this is so amazing, feeling the wind on my face and riding my bike along the Willamette River and uh and then on my way home, I'm riding my bike home and I get halfway home and I'm like start pedaling really slow and with one leg because all
Wow.
the symptoms are starting to set in and I'm starting to have these cold sweats and
Hmm.
I'm just like, oh shoot. And I get on my street and I'm just like slowly pushing my bike to my house. And
Right.
go get home. I throw my bike in the yard. I grab a chair, sit in my front yard with my wife and my son, and a friend comes over and they're looking at me. I'm white as a ghost, and they're like,
Hmm.
Patrick, you don't look so good. And I'm like, man, I don't feel so good.
Hmm.
And, I end up going to bed thinking I could sleep through it, but I couldn't, and so I get up and I'm like, babe, I got to go to the hospital. And so I'm crawling to the car. I
Hmm.
open the door, crawl inside. Luckily, the hospital is 3 blocks down the road.
Hmm.
And we'd get to the hospital. I open the door. I fall out of the car. I'm crawling into the hospital, crawl into, the check-in space. And I'm like, look, I need to see somebody now. I can't
Hmm.
do this check-in thing. And they're just like, oh, I'm sorry, you're conscious. We need to see your ID and blah, 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 do all this stuff. And I was just like, oh man. So long story short, another bowel obstruction. They wanted to diagnose me with Crohn's at that time.
Hmm.
And uh and so, that whole hospital visit for 6 days was, a book in itself, a story in
Right.
itself. It was craziness.
Hmm.
And so, you know, I uh I asked I asked the doctors, I'm just like, well, what's the cause of Crohn's disease?
Hmm.
And they all stood in front of me. There's three of them. They were three doctors, three
Yeah.
specialists, three GI specialist surgeons. They're all wearing their
Yeah.
white coats and they're standing in front of me with in an authoritative manner, looking like government officials. And I'm just kind of,
Hmm.
all right, this is weird. And they're all Mr. Lynch, or one says, Mr. Lynch, there is no known cause for Crohn's
Hmm.
disease, and you're going to be on hardcore medications for the rest of your life. Your life has changed now, and you're
Hmm.
not going to be able to do the things that you've used to do, and you're probably going to need some procedures in order to help keep you stable so you can continue living.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at this other guy who's just kind of like this tag along dude.
Hmm.
And he was walking in and out of my hospital room and, just kind of looking at me and giving me a smirk here and there. And I'm like, and who are you?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I'm an intern. I'm just observing. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're going to become a doctor, huh? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, why? Why are you becoming a doctor? And he just kind of looked all puzzled. And he's like, well, that's a question nobody asked me before. And he said that. And he was like, well, I think because I find it the most difficult thing to do. And I want to do something hard in my life. And I said, well, would you consider because you want to help people? You
Hmm.
want to help people feel good and get well? And he was like, well, that's something to consider.
That's depressing.
I was just like, yeah, it is something to consider. And
Yeah.
here I'm in my medical program, and that's exactly why I'm going to school because I care about people and I
Right.
want people to get well. And I'm like looking at these doctors like they don't even give a damn, you
Hmm.
know. And so I feel like must have had dollar signs on my forehead or something like
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
I get out of there, and that's a story in itself, reconnecting with them later. So I went on this mission of trying to figure out, what was going on with me.
Hmm.
And, I saw like 20 doctors, nobody could figure it out. And I wanted the root cause. I wanted
Yeah.
to nick this in the bud. I spent a year not being able to walk any more than 20 feet at a time, having lethal symptoms and exacerbations on a daily basis. My
Hmm.
wife was scared. My kid, she didn't know if I was going to live through this. My
Hmm.
kid was like, Dad, you're going to get this. I know you are. I know you're going to figure it out.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, I am going to figure it out. And And so, after spending tens of thousands of dollars, well over $100,000,
Yeah.
um, on trying to figure out what was going on with me, you
Hmm.
know, I take this class in my master's program in my senior year from Dr. Satya Ambrose, who's on this panel. And she's talking about the causes and sustainers of disease. Light
Hmm.
bulbs are going off in my head every single day. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, duh, what the hell? I have chronic immune reactions.
Hmm.
I have chronic infections. And this is what I have, thanks to Satya. She laid it all out. If you have
Hmm.
these set of symptoms, you have this. If you have these set of symptoms, you have that. And you
Hmm.
can get tested, but testing is, goofy and,
Hmm.
it's more likely that you're going to have, false negatives. And this is why. And
Hmm.
so I went home one day and I'm like, babe, I figured out what's wrong with me. And she's like, well, what's that? And I said, I have chronic infections. And she's like, oh, wow. So what are you going to do about that? And I'm like, don't worry about it. I got this.
Hmm.
And I did. And I annihilated my chronic infections within 8 months, got my life back. I was mountain biking in 6 months,
Hmm.
snowboarding before the year was over. And I was done, entered my doctorate program a
Hmm.
month before I was done with my own protocol for myself. Since then, I furthered my research in the doctorate program. I didn't want to do it at first. I was mad, I was
Hmm.
pissed that I had to go through this.
Right.
Knew that it wasn't just the last couple of years. It was long before this is when it started with all these little chronic symptoms that built up, that became bigger and more severe over time. And I developed more symptoms over time. So I was just pissed. I wanted to leave it all behind. And
Hmm.
finally, halfway through my first year of my doctorate program, I changed my thesis from something to do about meditation to, you know, what is, uh, I did my thesis on um, the root cause of autoimmune disease and
Hmm.
how to treat people with autoimmune disease with Chinese medicine and help them reach and remain in remission. And so, I had my theories and I backed up all my theories through research from the medical databases and,
Hmm.
chose the top herbs to um, to cross-examine with
Hmm.
different infections. And, I wanted to, you know, during my protocol of treating myself and, backing that up through research, I wanted to, find the top herbs that were um, uh, that were um, that were the best herbs to be used with each category of infection. I thought to myself, well, we live in this world full of microbes. There's
Hmm.
bazillions of them. How am I going to find out herbs that's going to go after each one of them?
Hmm.
And I was just like, okay, let's categorize them. Let's categorize the infections. We have malarial infections. We have bacterial infections. We have different types of classifications of bacterial infections.
Hmm.
We have um, protozoa, we have viruses, and we have nematodes, helminths, and spirochetes, which are a type of bacteria. But I kind of classify them in their own type of um, um, category.
Category.
And
Yeah.
then we have yeast, fungus, and mold. And so and then we have those pathogens, and then we have other herbs that do other things that help us get to those bugs and clean up the body and harmonize the body at the same time we're trying to clean up the body.
Hmm.
And that's just part of my research and part of the process of helping people get cleaned up as herbs. There's other things.
Hmm.
uh, and so that's how I got started. I got started with my own sickness and getting through that. And I learned that I had Lyme disease, co-infections. I had Babesia, Bartonella. I had systemic yeast infection.
Hmm.
and mold and mycotoxins. And I mean, you're never going to get rid of each and every last bug
Right.
in your body,
Right.
but you can knock it back to where you're in remission. You don't need to treat yourself anymore. And, you resume life,
Hmm.
eat what you want, but, eat healthy, keep your bugs under control, take a month of antimicrobials once a month,
Hmm.
or, for a full month out of every 6 months or a year.
Right.
And treat your bug bites when you get them. And, and so then after I received my doctorate, and I was already a practitioner before I was, a doctor, but I started treating, that's where my clinical practice began.
Hmm.
That's how I became an infectious disease specialist.
It seems like it was serendipity because I know, especially with Lyme, which is where you really excelled with a lot of patients
Yeah.
and got some of your notoriety. It seemed that's when Lyme became kind of an issue here, especially in the United States. It really, it
Yeah.
was kind of brewing in the 80s, but by the time 90s and early 2000s rolled around, Lyme became kind of an epidemic sort of thing. And it seems serendipitous that you went through what you went through and
Yeah.
were there and ready and able to help people. And your approach is very unique compared to some of the other well-known Lyme infectious disease doctors, whether they're allopathic or alternative medicine. How do you how do you think that your experience, now looking back, hindsight 2020,
Yeah.
when you were going through it, you were like, what the heck, WTF, this, why
Yeah.
me kind of a thing. But now you're here.
Yeah.
What do you see that you got out of it? What's the benefit for you and for your patients? And what, to me, it seems like it was a gift for, in the big scheme of things.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I think the gift is number one, I'm just grateful that I got through it so I can get my life back and so I can be there for my family and raise my kid and,
Yeah.
enjoy life. I love to live. I love the great outdoors. I love to snowboard and mountain bike, and I love the ocean. And I couldn't imagine leaving this world then. I was not done.
Hmm.
And so, I'm grateful for that. And the other thing that to answer your question
Yeah.
is, you know, in terms of bringing this to people and why my situation is different, or what I have to bring is different, and what that looks like is I was riding the ridge of life and death for a good year,
Hmm.
and I was debilitated. Um, I mean, I classify myself as being debilitated. I could not fend for myself. And
Hmm.
I had situations where, I would not have had a problem. And I had to, back down and keep my, just not be able to take care of myself, but I was safe. But I had some situations downtown Portland where I was at the mercy of whatever God wanted for the situation.
Right.
And knowing that if I was fully healthy, I would have dominated the situation. So I was I was not in, I not in a good way. I couldn't carry on a conversation without remembering what I was talking about.
Hmm.
I I had symptoms inside and out from head to toe that were just nuts,
Hmm.
bloody symptoms. And so being that I was about as bad as you can get, all the way to full health, that enabled me to understand what people are going through.
Hmm.
I had just about every symptom that you could have.
Hmm.
And without going into detail about it.
Hmm.
And so when people come to me, it's like I can I can empathize. I can understand what they're going through. And and being that I used to work with those symptoms, I could help them work with those symptoms like
Hmm.
I worked with them. And I can help them understand the trajectory of what you're going to go through next and what's happening now and why, and how things are going to unfold. and not to worry, I'm here for you. I got your back. And in regards to another thing, it's like I was so close to death that if I ate anything that metabolized as a polysaccharide, any starch at all, any like vinegar except for apple cider vinegar, um, anything that was, any type of polysaccharide that was not glucose or dextrose, then I would start to have severe, life-threatening symptoms where I would have to go to the hospital. I
Hmm.
was that sensitive. And to me, that tells me that my pathogenic load was so high and I needed to be so careful. I
Hmm.
couldn't get sad without my symptoms just going through the roof. I couldn't get angry. I couldn't get mad. I
Hmm.
couldn't get, overly frustrated. I had to be zen and I
Hmm.
had to be still. I couldn't move much. If I moved much or flexed my muscles, I would start stirring pathogen around in my tissues and my lymphatic system and my bloodstream. And then that would cause an increase of immune reactions. So I had to be still. I had to be
Hmm.
calm. I had to not eat anything that metabolized as a polysaccharide. And I had to keep all my stressors under control and not expose myself to environmental stressors. So I understand when people get to the point to where they are like that, then
Hmm.
I'm like, all right, this is what you got to do. You got to do this, 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 and stay away from these foods. And you can coast for a little bit as we start detoxing and getting you cleaned up. It's going to take, a month or two before you get out of the woods. But that's what I bring to the table is I can help people who are in this scary, scary place
Hmm.
start to get better. Because you take people who are in that scary place and you give them an antibiotic, they're going to hit the floor. They're going to
Hmm.
be in bed for a week with vomiting, diarrhea, all kinds of things.
Right.
And
Hey, I think this is a great point to bring this up. You know, people's reactions and things. Let's get
uh,
into your understanding of what is at the root cause of these kinds of chronic illnesses like Lyme. And that might help people understand better why do people have these kinds of reactions when they're on these antibiotic protocols or eating a food? What's at the root cause of most of these
the root
illnesses?
the root cause of chronic illness, you
Mm.
know, whether it be autoimmune disease, other diagnosed illnesses that I won't mention, um, and terminal illnesses. In my clinical experience, has always been an elevated pathogenic load, whether it be people come to me with a diagnosis or not. I've
Mhm.
had people with diagnoses, such as Parkinson's, fibromyalgia, early onset dementia, um, Batten's disease, um, um, other neurological diseases, Crohn's disease, people that have these phantom pain symptoms that I find, causes that are related to infection, because they didn't have an injury and they didn't have any other thing happen. And, I might find that they had SIBO at one time, and SIBO can get systemic in the body and start to cause problems in other places of the body. And so SIBO is an infection that gets systemic. Any time that I find people with, chronic illness, chronic regional pain syndrome, Gulf War syndrome, um, Crohn's disease, IBS, um, you know, urinary tract diseases. Um, it's always due to a chronic infection of some kind. I don't like the term Lyme disease because when people think that, oh, maybe my Crohn's is caused by Lyme disease and they get tested for Lyme disease and they show up
Mhm.
negative, then they
Mhm.
think, oh, well, it's not Lyme disease. Lyme disease is just an infection. It's just one infection out of gazillion different types of infections.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a mold infection. There could be, some sort of STD infection that is commonly associated with Crohn's disease that gets systemic and brews over time. Um, the sky's the limit, and then we have Treponomas that live naturally in the mouth, and then we have H. pylori that live naturally in the stomach, that can cause things like GERD or acid reflux. And then we develop esophageal cancer that's more commonly due to H. pylori. And we have Treponomas, which is a spirochete that lives naturally in the mouth that can migrate to the brain and start causing brain fog, short-term memory loss, dementia, and so forth. So it doesn't have to be Lyme disease. It can be any kind of chronic infection. It could be mold, mycotoxins, yeast infections. I've had people with chronic yeast infections, and I'm like, well, how'd you get that? And so we go down and we check out the history, and I've
Mm-hmm.
had somebody who got a chronic yeast infection from drinking kombucha every day.
Oh my gosh.
I
Seriously?
know. Yes. And you would think that, oh, well, kombucha is healthy. It's supposed to keep
Yeah.
the yeast under control. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, actually, it appears that if you drink it every day and
Mm-hmm.
you're presenting with symptoms associated with an elevated yeast infection, it's a
Mm-hmm.
living creature. And the environment inside your body is conducive for this living creature.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, at any rate, in my
Oh,
experience, chronic illness is due to chronic infections. And can there be other things? Yes, there can be environmental toxin. I always screen for environmental toxin, whether it be from amalgams, drinking water in a certain area, or, what have you. Um, but I screen for it and I find it a couple of times. And when people have environmental toxicity that's abundant, then they commonly also have chronic infections because when they have environmental toxicity, it weakens the immune system to the point to where they're more prone for chronic infections.
so uh, is there a connection between susceptibility to these illnesses and maybe the general state of a person's body? There's, a lot of camps out there, some saying that epigen or genes drive illness versus environment. What's your feeling on that? And, you know, who's going to be more likely to get sick other than other people?
Yeah, okay. Well, good question. Who's likely to get more sick versus other people? So the people who are health-minded, who understand to keep their bugs under control, that's the main thing. That's the main thing that doctors aren't telling their patients. That's the main thing that we don't learn that we should be learning in elementary school. It's like we are hosts for Mother Nature's microbes out here. And, we have all these categories of pathogens. We have protozoa, widespread bacteria, we got parasites, we have viruses, mold, yeast, fungus, all kinds of things. And, you know, pathogens, they want to control their host. And
Mhm.
hence the neurological diseases that we get, the chemical messages that get sent to our brains, making us think that we want something when in actuality, they want them for their survival.
Mhm.
Hence the MTHFR gene mutation. When we aren't born
Mhm.
with that gene mutation, it can be mutated later on in life. Why does that gene get mutated? Could it be a somatic mutation where the pathogens that become abundant in the body change that gene to best assure their survival? I think that's a strong possibility. Um, so, people who are health minded, people who are healthy, people who are conscious about their living environment and their working environment to make sure that they are in mold-free environments, that they
Mhm.
don't have mold in their walls, mold in their workplace. Um, they're conscious about, this day and age, you have to be extremely conscious about where you get your food. You don't want to be, uh, you want to be eating organic.
Hmm.
With all the with what's going on this day and age with 3D printing of food, we don't
Hmm.
know what we're eating. We have genetic engineering of food. We have genetic modifications. We have food that's being sprayed with who knows what.
Hmm.
Glyphosate's bad enough, but
Hmm.
what else is in there? And so eating organic is, if you're going to eat commercial food, eating organic is starting to be questionable also. It's almost
Hmm.
as if you want to start growing your own food these days. Collect
Hmm.
seeds, grow your own food,
And in a greenhouse, because
yeah,
we're
right.
so toxic that stuff
Mhm.
is wafting into people's gardens now, you
Sure,
know? Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And keep your bugs under control. And, to answer your question regarding susceptibility and
Yeah.
epigenetics is like, you I don't think people need to concern themselves on epigenetics and what we're susceptible to if we keep our bugs under control, if we keep our stressors under control, if we're healthy, if we're mindful of our living environments, if we eat healthy and stay away from crap and move our blood and get exercise, then susceptibility, I don't really think that it matters, because what I have found in research and what I have found in clinically are the people who have genetic presentations of these weak genes presenting, they have an elevated pathogenic load.
Hmm.
And when they get their bugs under control, that gene presentation of whatever disease manifestation they have, it goes dormant.
Hmm.
It just goes dormant. It's not about the gene, it's about the symptoms associated with the gene, and it's about the gene presentation. If it's cancer, it's like, okay, there's what, like 5 cancers that are associated with genetics. And
Hmm.
so when the pathogenic load gets to a point to where it's going to trigger those weak genes or environmental toxin, then those genes are going to present with cancer. And so get the bugs under control, knock them back, the cancer goes away. I mean,
What's wrong with testing methods today? It seems, we often hear a lot of people are misdiagnosed. Is there
yeah,
a connection with that?
a connection with misdiagnosis.
And testing methods.
Oh, absolutely. So let's say let's say somebody has a symptoms associated with Bartonella. They have drenching night sweats. They have calf cramping, chest cramping. They have some mental health issues. They get easily triggered. Um, and they're starting to develop some neurological issues. They get burning pain in different areas of the body. Um, and the doctors clued in on the potential for Bartonella here. And so, but the doctor bases their clinical diagnostics and confirms it with laboratory diagnostics. And
Hmm.
they won't treat the patient appropriately unless they have a positive diagnostics from a laboratory test.
Right.
And so then they test their patient for Bartonella, for 5 different strains of Bartonella, and nothing
Hmm.
shows up. It shows up,
Hmm.
everything shows up negative. And it's been proven that at the single cell level, the DNA of the single cell protein constantly is in a constant state of flux. I mean,
Hmm.
this is what Dr. Alan McDonald found out. And before he figured this out, Dr. Hideo Noguchi figured this out, back in the 1920s or so. I mean, this is old
Hmm.
research.
Hmm.
And, so DNA is always in a constant state of flux. So if we're getting tested, here's a test that tests for a single strand of DNA, a
Hmm.
picture in a moment of time with a Bartonella pathogen. Meanwhile, all these species of Bartonella are constantly changing, you
Hmm.
know, to the point to where it's likely not going to line up with this image on a test in a certain period of time. And so I heard one doctor say um, that you have about 1 in 50 chances of testing positive for Bartonella if and when
Mhm.
you have an abundance of it. And I've known people to test positive for Bartonella. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's hit and miss. However, with me in regards to, diagnostics, I don't test people. If people have chronic illness, I have studied the work of Dr. Richard Horowitz, and I know what people, when I know what people are presenting with, and I go down their history and find out about their history, their demographics, and all kinds of things. Um, I'm able to pretty much clinically figure out what they're working with. And
Mhm.
regardless, if I pick up Babesia and some sort of spirochete or mold, fungus, yeast, and mycotoxins, I just I just treat people for everything. I
Mhm.
just say, okay, we're going to do a cleanup here, and we're going to start this way, and then we're going to, continue, cleaning you up, and this is the process. This is what it looks like. And that way we leave nothing out. And,
Mhm.
you know, people are usually excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about your approach? This approach, I think, is pretty unique, and especially for most people who've strictly been working with allopathic doctors. Um, what is the benefit, especially for people who believe they're falling through the cracks or believe they will never be healed? They haven't had any luck. How does this approach benefit people like that?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. It's a lot of times people will see a lot of doctors before they come to me, and they tell me that I'm their last chance. And a lot of people, they won't even trust me. They'll come in or they'll call and they'll just be like, I don't even know why I'm calling you. But here I am. And I wish people would come to me first, you know. But I'm glad they come to me last because my protocol is probably the more difficult of the protocols in regards to compliance. And not that people have to comply, but they have to agree, understand. They have to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And that's what I have people do.
Mhm.
Um, and so to answer your question, um, you know, why does this why does this protocol work for a lot of people
Mhm.
um, who haven't had results from other doctors? Is that your question?
That is.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty plain and simple. And number one is I had chronic infections with just about every category of infections, and I was down, and I knew how to stay alive. And in order to stay alive, number one, you can't feed the bugs. If you eat anything that metabolizes as a polysaccharide or a starch,
Mhm.
you're going to feed the infection. That's my explanation for it. And, are you really feeding it? Actually, yes. It's not only my explanation, but I've seen the research, I've done the research, and I've done the research of all categories of infections, and I know what feeds them. I have the research documented. And so when you feed the infection becomes more motile and they proliferate at a more rapid rate when people have chronic infections, especially when they have an elevated pathogenic load that's elevated to the point to where the immune system is not enough to keep them under control. So when that happens, you need to not feed the bugs. And so what happens is when you don't feed the bugs, when you do the dietary modifications impeccably, and when your pathogenic load is that high to where you have chronically firing symptoms all the time that get to be dangerous, you can't make a mistake. There is no room for error. And so when you are impeccable with the dietary modifications, what happens for the first couple of weeks is the bugs get hungry and they get
Mhm.
pissed. They become more motile and they're like, come on, man, feed me.
Mhm.
And And so people's anxiety will pick up a little bit and their symptoms may pick up a little bit. They may have some, elevated, they may have some more episodes of elevated heart rate, tachycardia and stuff
Hmm.
like that. But after a couple of weeks of doing that, then
Hmm.
what happens is the bugs, they, they, they get tired and fatigued because they haven't been able to eat and they're just like, oh. And then when there's no motility in the body, then people's symptoms just drop. And it's like they don't like go away,
Hmm.
because the body's full of antigens and waste material and stuff like that. But they drop significantly. And the reason why they drop is because when the motility of the pathogen is at rest, then that helps the immune system rest. And when
Hmm.
the immune system is not constantly firing, then we have less immune reactions. And when we have less immune reactions, we have less symptoms.
Hmm.
So that's one reason why, my approach is effective. Another reason why my approach is effective is because I leave nothing out. And I have a system of cleaning the body. The system is, I think it's brilliant.
Well, you've explained a lot about the dietary modification aspect of your protocol. Can you give us a little more information about how or what are the stages that you go about for treating all illnesses? Because really, your protocol can help more than just Lyme patients. What do you do?
Yeah, well, good question. So when people come to me with chronic illness, I try to figure out, why they have it. And, so far, like I've said, I've found they have chronic infections. Multiple systemic infectious disease syndrome is what Dr. Richard Horowitz um, uh, calls it when there's multiple systemic infections, which I find most people have. And, if you treat people for, if they come in and they say that, oh, I have mold and mycotoxins and I got to, get this mold under control, they usually have more things. And so you got to do some digging and find out, their history and what else is going on. And so to answer your question, what I do is after taking people's history, it's like when
Hmm.
people come to me, it's like I want to hear them. I want to hear what they have to say. And
Hmm.
that starts the healing process is when people feel heard, then they're more likely to listen to what you have to say and what they need to know.
Hmm.
And um and so there's more dynamics to that I won't really get into, um but in regards to my protocol, it first starts with what I have people do for the first 7 to 10 days is get
Hmm.
on board with the dietary modifications. I give them a list of foods to eat and a list of foods not to eat. And then they'll have more questions because I don't have all the foods in the world,
Hmm.
dialed in, on the list of what to eat, what not to eat. So
Hmm.
I just say, hey, text me, ask if you want to eat something that you are uncertain, you know, just text and ask. And I
Hmm.
will lay categories of foods to stay away from so they don't have to, ask so many questions,
Hmm.
like roots. Roots have a lot of sugars. There
Hmm.
are a few roots that you can have, but for the most part, stay away from roots. And and so, the dietary modifications are number one,
Hmm.
stop feeding the bugs. Number two, start opening up the detox pathways with S-acetylglutathione.
Hmm.
And S-acetylglutathione, I base their dosage off of two things, weight and type of infection.
Hmm.
When people have, Mycoplasma, Bartonella, Babesia, we have to be a little bit more careful on with high doses of S-acetylglutathione. When people have like mold infections, spirochete infections, other widespread bacteria, you can be a little bit more aggressive with the S-acetylglutathione.
Hmm.
And it's based on their weight. I have honed the dosing of S-acetylglutathione quite nicely. And a lot of people like liposomal glutathione. That's what a lot of people use.
Hmm.
As glutathione is I want to say is about 90% more effective.
Mm,
Uh, it's extremely effective. It is more expensive, but I don't even mess around with liposomal or any other glutathione. It's not as good and it doesn't work the same. And if people are going to do my protocol, they have to
hmm
use S-acetylglutathione. Otherwise, I just don't work with other things. And
hmm
I can't navigate it. I won't navigate it in that way, you know. I don't have much wiggle room for people who do my protocol, and because it works. And so it starts out with opening up the detox pathways and not feeding the bugs. And then I start with one formula, one formula that goes after all categories of infections, with the exception of penetrating the cell, penetrating the red blood cell, for like malarial type of infections.
hmm
And so, what we do is I start people out with a very small dose. A full dose would be 5 capsules twice per day of a certain herbal formula. We have 5 herbs in that formula that are widespread antimicrobial and the
hmm
most elite herbs for each category of infection that they combat. And then there's 5 other herbs in that formula that have more of a systemic approach that help the herbs do their job and
hmm
help the body, help the body with circulation, help the body relax, um, help reduce pain, help calm the mind, help clean the vascular plaques and so forth. Um,
These
so
are not herbs. I think a lot of people have been on the rodeo of trying to heal Lyme and other chronic diseases, excuse me. Are you more familiar with either the Halder Clark herbal protocol or the Buhner protocol? How does this differ? Because you're really unique. Your herbals are not like what most of the other practitioners out there are using. Can you talk a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Well, good point. It's I don't if I use Bruner herbs, it's because I like the herbs and I've done the research and I've used them clinically, but I don't follow Bruner's guidelines.
Mhm,
I don't follow other people's guidelines. I've done the research, I've used them clinically, I've used them myself. I've cross-examined herbs with the um, certain categories of infections, and I use the top ones that are found to be the top herb for
mhm,
each category of infection. And I'm a Chinese medicine herbalist. I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. I
mhm,
understand herbs in a different way
mhm,
than most people and Western herbalists do. And herb combinations are essential in order to have them function in a good way. And then you have quality. And
mhm,
my herbs, I make sure that they are the elite quality of herbs. I take
mhm,
my herbs to herbal manufacturers to encapsulate for me, and they
mhm,
compliment me. They're like, "Oh my God, where do you get your extracts? They're really nice."
mhm,
And I tell them where I get my extracts, and and they're impressed, and my patients do really well with them. So in regards to uh me utilizing herbs, if I were to utilize the Booner protocol,
mhm,
um, I wouldn't, I would make a lot more money. I would probably have a lot more patients,
mhm,
and but I would not have the success that I do um, in terms of getting people through it from
mhm,
beginning until the end.
mhm,
Um, so I don't use herbs with polysaccharides. Booner will say that, oh, it's the polysaccharide that actually does the healing.
mhm,
Sorry to say, but he's wrong. He's flat wrong. Japanese knotweed, that may be helpful for people, but it doesn't work. It won't
mhm,
take people all the way there. It has sugars in there. In fact, my Intracell 2 formula, it's like everybody uses Japanese knotweed.
mhm,
And I thought after, a couple of years of, clinically using cryptolipines in my Intracell 2 formula, I thought, well, okay, I'll use Japanese knotweed and just add it in there and see how it does.
mhm,
I added it in there, and people are so clean that do my protocol. They are
mhm,
so clean. They don't eat any polysaccharides. Their detoxification is is steady.
Mm-hmm.
And we are maximizing the aggressiveness at treatment at all times while keeping people stable and functional. And I add Japanese, excuse me, Japanese knotweed in there, and people start to get worse. Their symptoms start to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually the malarial type of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
It's the burning pain, the sharp shooting electrical like pains,
Mm-hmm.
some mental health issues, some night sweats, some cramping. And
Mm-hmm.
these aren't Herx reactions. And these symptoms come back. I used it for like 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are using the Japanese knotweed had symptoms that came back the whole time. And it was the only herb in there in my formulas that have polysaccharides.
Mm-hmm.
And so I discontinued using Japanese knotweed. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
big boon or herb. That's what all the Lyme disease
Yeah.
doctors use.
Mm-hmm.
So, back to my protocol is I start people slowly. And
Mm-hmm.
I find and they find their tolerance and they move up to a full dose of the first formula slowly. Basically, what we're working on is we're working on their gut biome first.
Mm-hmm.
The herbs, they go to their gut and
Mm-hmm.
they go to their stomach, they go to their gut, their intestines, and they start harmonizing the microbial balance in there.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, they get into the blood and they start cleaning the blood. They
Mm-hmm.
start cleaning the plasma. They start cleaning the bugs that are floating around in the blood. They start cleaning the lymphatic uh, fluids. And then once people can tolerate a full dose of the first formula,
Mm-hmm.
then they start the second formula. And they start at a really low dose. And the second formula penetrates the red blood cell. It starts addressing the pathogen inside the cell. And so people work up to a full dose of that. And usually people start feeling, die off with that second formula also right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people will move up to a full dose of that formula. And so now people are cruising on two formulas and they're having, some die off, but they're manageable because they worked up slowly. And, and then after 7 weeks of starting the second formula, which is the anti-malarial formula and the anti-parasitic formula, we rotate to a different formula to offset pathogenic resistance. Um, Research shows that bugs will develop resistance in 8 weeks. Clinically, I find that people develop resistance in 7 weeks. So I'll rotate the second formula every 7 weeks. After people get to the place where they're symptom free, I pick up aggressiveness. I add something else. I'm not going to talk about that now to
Mm-hmm.
the regimen. And then people are like, oh, there is more there. I am having more die off. And so then people will cruise with that for a while, and then they'll get symptom free again. And then we will finally remove the first formula that people started taking, and then we will replace it with an aggressive biofilm and cyst breaking formula. This formula for biofilm and cyst breaking is more aggressive than anything anybody will find on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I have another formula that's even more aggressive than that later on. However, people will start taking that. And then when they start taking that, they're like, oh my God, there is more there. They start having die off again, and they take that for a certain amount of time with the other herbs and with the other thing. And and then they get to the point to where they're symptom free again. And during that time, they're taking that cyst and breaking and biofilm opening formula. They'll have every time they take the formula, they'll have little light up spots in their body, where they'll have like a nodule that lights up with burning pain for
Mm-hmm.
about 20, 30 seconds after, a few minutes after taking the formula. And it'll work in different parts of the body, and people will find different spots light up with pain as the herbs are addressing it in that location, as they go through treatment until that just doesn't happen anymore. And when that doesn't happen anymore for a good month or so, then we pick up aggressiveness one more time. Then I give them bags of herbs, that are wrapped up in a like a burrito looking like wrap, and
Mm-hmm.
which are full of like sticks and twigs and leaves and thorns, and I utilize things like beetles and scorpions and sometimes centipedes to basically what they do in Chinese medicine is they go deep and
Mm-hmm.
they go right to the areas, what they call in Chinese, the luo mai, the
Mm-hmm.
dark space, the space where blood and body fluids don't go very easily. And you want to use these herbs at the end. If you use them at the beginning and biofilm opening herbs at the beginning, you're just going to open up the
Mm-hmm.
homes of these pathogens and release them into an infected body and cause more symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Clean the body up first before you take these bugs out of hiding. Otherwise, you can make people really sick.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you use the bugs last, bugs will go right to those places and open them up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go in there with the other antimicrobial herbs and the other things that we're using and go in there and address the pathogen. I remember I had a cyst in the lower right quadrant,
Mm-hmm.
and I I was treating myself with my chronic infections, and I'm trying to get this doctor to do a podcast with us. And he's incredible, and he he's a doctor of Chinese medicine also,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I could feel the cyst. It's part of the reason why I went to the ER so many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I was mountain biking again. I was running and jogging, but I could still feel that burning and, cyst-like sensation there. And I talked to my friend. I'm like, hey, I feel like I'm doing great, but I got this cyst in my lower right quadrant of my abdomen I can't seem to get. And and he's like, all right, yeah, I think I can help you with that. And he's like, you're gonna have to be careful with it. And this guy doses big. If you want to get anywhere with Chinese medicine, you got to dose big. You
Mm-hmm.
dose how the Chinese dose in China, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so at any rate, he gives me this formula and he puts some scorpion in there and some beetle in there and some other things in there. And and so he's like, make this formula last a couple of days, but um, and be careful with it. And I knew what to do if I opened up a cyst that would cause a systemic reaction. So I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, okay, I took his advice, but I didn't. He said to make it utilize 2 days. I drank half the formula the um in my first dose,
Mm-hmm.
and so the first dose I could feel the pressure give on that cyst,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately I had flu-like reactions. I got a
Mm-hmm.
fever, I had cold sweats, I had tachycardia and fatigue. I felt bad, I felt gross. And so
Mm-hmm.
then I take these other things and hardcore antimicrobials to just knock it out, and within 15 minutes all my immune reactions ceased. The tachycardia was gone, the fever was gone, the sweats were gone, but I
Wow.
felt really fatigued. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God. And it was a hot, sunny day. I was just like, I put on my sunglasses, my hat, and
Mm-hmm.
tank top, and I went to my son's baseball game and sat in a chair and just celebrated. I was just so stoked,
Yeah.
opened that thing up with 1 cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued going after that for the next 30 days
Mm-hmm.
and with no added symptoms, but I wanted to keep it open, keep it addressing it until, I felt like I didn't need to anymore. And after that, I was done. And that's
Mm-hmm.
how I treat other people too. It's like, I want my second, I want my first biofilm cyst formula to open up everything for people. So when I use this other bulk herb formula, it doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that 50% of the time it does.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it happens within the first few times when
Mm-hmm.
people utilize, and I use it very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just, my intention is not to just break open a cyst. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, I want to moisten the cyst, kind of bring it to a head first. And then
Mm-hmm.
I want to dry it. and then I want to moisten it, and then I want to dry it, and then moisten it and dry it. When you dry it, you're killing the bugs on the inside. If you
Mhm.
just go piercing open a cyst, not knowing where these cysts could be,
Mhm.
it could hurt somebody really bad. So you got to really, really be careful. I mean, allopathic medicine and pharmaceuticals and accidents, they happen all the time.
Mhm.
People die all the time, from
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals and medical accidents. You sign your life away. With Chinese medicine, you can't have accidents.
Mhm.
You can't, people don't sign their life away. Plus, you're responsible for people's health and
Mhm.
people's livelihood and
Mhm.
liveliness. And it's like you don't want to hurt people. And
Mhm.
plus, if you did, you're not an allopathic doctor. You're going down, you know,
Mhm.
and the person's going down, and that's worse,
Mhm.
So, there is no room for error. And
Mhm.
so cyst breaking, biofilm, dissolving is something that has to be taken very seriously, and it has to be done at the right time. Yeah, I've heard naturopathic doctors, allopathic doctors say, to their patients that say to me later on, oh, this person's not getting better. We should go after the biofilm.
Mhm.
No, you don't go after the biofilm. You get the person better first, and then you go after the biofilm when they don't have symptoms anymore.
Mhm.
So in a nutshell, that's my protocol. And then after that, that's the first phase is getting people cleaned out.
Mhm.
And, along the lines, people will go through, different uh people will go through things, their first couple of months, they will, you know, they will feel a certain way. Second couple of months, they'll feel a certain way. Third couple of months, they'll feel a certain way. Next couple of months, they'll feel a certain way. It usually takes about 10 months. People
Mhm.
who are debilitated are generally exercising again by 5 months.
Mhm.
People who are debilitated are generally out of the woods, feeling like they're a part of society again, able
Mhm.
to do things at 3 months.
Mhm.
People are feeling better who are debilitated at 2 months.
Mhm.
After 1 month, people don't feel better who are debilitated. But when we visit at the 5 week mark and we go over their list of symptoms, many of their symptoms are gone. Some of their symptoms are better. And so when they see the progress, they're like, oh, wow, I've had those symptoms for, 10, 20 years. And now that I don't have them anymore.
Mhm.
Then even though they don't feel better and they know that they're doing the right thing, but they don't feel better, they see the tangible evidence on paper and they see, okay, this is working. I don't have that. So
Mhm.
it's identifying that it's working at month one. They're feeling a little bit better at month two. On paper, they're quite a bit better. Month three, they're out of the woods. Month four, they have some Herxheimer reactions going on. Month five, they're exercising again. And from
Mhm.
then on, it's just about, getting through it. And so I like to take people to remission. I'm not here to manage people's chronic illness. I'm
Mhm.
here to get them well. I don't care what's going on with them. I will do whatever it takes. And
Mhm.
if I don't know, I will work to figure it out.
Mhm.
And that's how I work.
Now, I'm going to get into some stuff. I've gone through your protocol. It's great. But I
Yeah.
know, I think about some friends of mine that I would love to go through your protocol. And
Yeah.
I know exactly where you would run into challenges with these patients, these potential patients. The big things that I think you should explain the value and the benefit of these certain things. I bet one, when my friends witnessed me going through your program, their
Yeah.
big thing was bugs. You're
Yeah.
actually ingesting centipedes and scorpions and things like that.
Yeah.
Explain, the value of this. And I'll just say one thing for anyone out there who's listening.
Mhm.
For me, I am the biggest scaredy cat. I do not like insects. I don't
Yeah.
like big creepy things, nature shows where they show these things. It's pretty upsetting,
Yeah.
you know. But the thing is, if you get over the mind over matter part of it and you see the immediate results,
Mhm.
if you can get out of that Western mindset
Yeah.
that, these things are creepy and look at them more as what the benefit are, you'll be pleased. But what do you have to say about, that initial ick factor for people?
Yeah, it's a good question. Number one, people have plenty of time to gear up for it.
Mhm,
And, people are well and they're ready to be done before they start ingesting centipede or scorpion or
mhm,
beetle or earthworm. And, and so at any rate, um, when it comes time for that, you know, we can use bulk herb form to where I can send people the actual centipedes or send people the actual scorpions. And
mhm,
the scorpions, they have their abdomen pulled off, so it's
mhm,
not, it's not toxic. It just
mhm,
has the other enzymatic effects that just go in and destroy. In
mhm,
nature, it's like roots, they
mhm,
will dig down in
mhm,
nature and dig into, they'll burrow under rocks and they'll dig down, but it takes them a long time to dissolve. Saps like frankincense, they just push through everything. They push through a tree and they open up all kinds of stuff.
mhm,
But they flow really slow. And they do
mhm,
the same thing in the body. Roots do the same thing in the body. Saps do the same thing in the body. Bugs,
mhm,
bugs move really quickly. They will
mhm,
burrow into the ground, they'll turn over rocks, they'll go deeper, they'll consume anything that's in their way. They
mhm,
uh, they have, they ingest things that are biological and, destroy them. They're toxic, toxicity kills infection. Um, they're not toxic to where it's going to hurt you, and you don't want to, it's not like you want to take them every day.
mhm,
Um, but and their toxicity is not going to hurt you it's not going to hurt you in an acute situation while taking them. It's not going to even raise the liver enzymes. Uh, and and you're not taking them long term. You're taking them for about 20 days
mhm,
and you're taking a normal dose of them, a safe dose.
mhm.
And
And usually
so,
in a powder form, right? I mean, most
yes,
of the time people are not going to see the
no,
bug. Right.
no, you take it in a powder form. I
Mhm,
send it to people in powder form. It's ground, it's in a granule form, and it's
mhm,
just, ground up, powdered, processed centipede or
mhm,
um, scorpion. So wugong is centipede, uh, chuanjie is scorpion. Those are the Chinese terms of it.
mhm,
Dilong is earthworm.
mhm,
Dubiachong is beetle. And beetles are great, great medicine. It's like we use a type of beetle that you could basically pull its wings off, pull its legs off, pull its body in half, and it will regrow itself. And so it
Wow.
contains those enzymes that
Mhm,
if people have injuries or nerve degeneration or, you know, tendon or ligament injuries,
mhm,
beetle is really good for helping to mend the injuries and
mhm,
mend them quicker. And when people are done with the protocol, it's all about regeneration. It's then, when they're done, we need to make sure that their IGF-1 levels are up to their high normal range so they
mhm,
can start regenerating nicely. We keep them detoxing because even though that we killed off all categories of infections, they're left with antigens in their body still. So we got to keep them on high doses of vitamin C, S-acetylglutathione, and start taking NAC to like charge up the liver because
mhm,
the liver's tired by then. And big
mhm,
doses of NAC, like 2,400 to 3,000 milligrams per day, then, people's liver is going to, regenerate and power up more quickly.
mhm.
Uh, so the regeneration phase after, killing off the infections is really important. Um,
How are we doing on time?
we have, probably 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you finish everything you were going to say right there?
Yeah.
I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Um, what do you think about these are the three things I had in mind left. Do we want to get into detail about the difficulty of the diet and the benefit of that? Do we want to talk about the mind-body connection toward healing? Or do we want to talk about external? So we talked about pathogens being a cause, but what about external things like toxins,
I touched
your
on that
environment?
enough.
What's that?
I touched on that enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of those things you think you've touched on, or
No, the toxin.
okay.
Yeah.
So of the other two, are you interested in talking about either of those, or do you want to wrap?
Which two?
Mind-body connection for healing and or even contracting illness, or triggers. And you kind of did touch on that actually. Um, Triggers with dormant stealth illnesses, bringing on the cascade sometimes of the manifestation of an illness.
Yeah, I did touch on that.
Yeah.
We can talk about the mind-body connection. We could also talk about um,
Difficulty of the diet. That was the one other thing. Yeah.
how the pathogenic load increases over time. It's like,
Okay.
how do people get an elevated pathogenic load?
Okay.
And what is there a mind-body connection associated with that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Patrick, my next question is, how do people get to that point where they have such an elevated pathogenic load? And is there a connection between someone's state of mind, as to whether or not they contract these illnesses?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. It all boils back to, education about keeping our bugs under control from starting on early in life. And that's one of the things that I find that, women who are encouraged to have children, they're encouraged to have children early on in life, like in their 20s. And you might consider, why is that? And, by their 30s and 40s, their pathogenic load is naturally higher in the body. And the blood that women have, they share with their developing baby. And, when the pathogenic load increases naturally over life, that naturally causes most diseases, they share this with their baby if they, are pregnant later on in life. And then their baby is more likely to have an elevated pathogenic load at birth.
Hmm.
If people have Lyme disease or they have chronic illness or if they have autoimmune disease and they become pregnant and they're able to keep their babies, then their baby is more likely to be born with issues or develop issues, pretty early on in life. And I've seen that happen quite a bit too. So if somebody were to be born healthy, you know, the the uh, the process of developing an elevated pathogenic load starts with basically not keeping our bugs under control.
Hmm.
And, it's like, you know, if people have, pets and they let dogs lick their faces, dogs are eating cat poop off the ground, they come in, they lick people's eyeballs and their nose, and people get all gooey with their dogs and lick their dog's tongue and they kiss.
Let their dogs sleep with them on their
Mhm.
pillows with their
Yeah. And
dirty
then
little bums.
it's like, come on, don't let your dog lick your face or,
Yeah.
if your dog licks your hands or you pet your dog, wash your hands before you eat. And then you have cats, they have a tendency to get cat scratch fever.
Hmm.
Mice, so they eat mice and they take a poo and they bury their poo with their paws and then they come in the house and they, jump all over the house and run around on the couches and the countertops and spreading, potential bacteria everywhere. And people, their hands are everywhere and they got their faces on cushions on the couch. And,
Hmm.
after the cat's been walking around on that and people don't, they're not conditioned a lot of times to wash their hands before they eat every time. And,
Hmm.
so they grab a Dorito or something off the table or, whatever, and they're ingesting who knows what, they're
Right.
biting fingernails. We got parasites that live under our fingernails. And, and then we might develop food sensitivities that are unbeknownst to us, such as gluten. We might be sensitive to gluten. And even though that we seem to be fine, we people might start to develop cracks in their intestines. They start to get moody. They have systemic inflammatory responses where they start getting earaches and runny noses. And when they start getting cracks in their intestines, then we start taking in the bacteria from the intestine, the good and bad, which can
Hmm.
cause systemic infections. If we get bit by vectors like teas, like ticks and fleas,
Hmm.
and flies and sandflies and fleas and
Mosquitoes.
spiders,
Mm.
mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes are known to carry Bartonella and transmit Bartonella. And
Mm.
it's like these are microscopic organisms that come
Mm.
out from these vectors. And a lot of times they're not going to give us acute infections where we're chronically or where we start to, react in an acute, severe manner. But
Mhm.
sometimes they do. And, sometimes they do, affect us acutely. But when they don't, the pathogenic load starts to build up there.
Mhm.
And, just exposure, swimming in the lakes, rivers, and streams. There's things like liver flukes in the river behind me. And it's like you don't want to get water in your mouth. You want to wash your body after swimming in the river. And, people, they just live, we all live, we all do our thing. We're not conscious of microorganisms and we're not conscious of keeping our bugs under control. And
Mhm.
over time, the pathogenic load builds. And um, and then when we have things like chronic stress, the immune system weakens. And
Mhm.
when the immune system weakens, then the pathogenic load in the body, a lot of times the immune system will keep the pathogenic load cysted up in like
Mhm.
biofilm and cyst form. And then when people have chronic stress, the immune system stops or slows way down. And the bugs
Mhm.
sense this and then they come out of hiding and then they start multiplying at a more rapid rate, and they might start causing symptoms. And
Mhm.
then if people have trauma, like if they go through a divorce or a breakup, or somebody dies, or if they have an injury, that's pretty traumatic. And when they have that, then the pathogenic load will also come out of hiding and start to cause symptoms. When women have children, when they give birth, a lot of times symptoms will start to present after giving birth. A lot of
Mhm.
women develop things like Hashimoto's after giving birth, or they will have, they develop chronic illness after giving birth because it's traumatic. And
Mhm.
that trauma will weaken the immune system to the point to where the bugs are like, hey, the coast is clear. We can come out and party and start feeding off the body and doing damage. And when that happens, then we start presenting with, you know, chronic illness.
Mhm.
So, we need to learn how to keep our bugs under control. That's the thing. That's the missing link to, you know, that to prevent chronic illness and chronic disease. And it's the missing link to a long, healthy, happy life.
Mhm.
Um, and, if when you get bit by a mosquito, or a tick or something like that, don't just like pull it out and,
Yeah.
make a doctor's appointment. And,
Mhm.
2 weeks later, the doctor's like, oh, well, maybe we should give you an antibiotic.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, infection's brewing, in
Right.
the arm or whatever. After you pull a tick out or after you got bit by a mosquito, put some clove oil on there,
Mhm.
high quality clove oil from like doTERRA or something. Put a
Mhm.
band-aid over it and keep it on there for, a good 5 days or something. Try to intentionally kill what was potentially injected into your arm or
Mhm.
wherever you got bit. And, just have that awareness. Wash your hands, wash your sheets, once a week or every few days or something. And, if you have dogs or cats, be mindful. And, don't.
Another hidden vector, I'm probably opening a can of worms, but mold, you know,
Oh,
that
yeah.
I think is a really big one. Most people have that in there, especially where I live in the Midwest. Mold in
Yeah.
a home is pretty much standard. That's
Yes.
a big secret one. I think a lot of people are walking around don't realize that,
Mold is
it's affecting
huge.
them.
Mold is huge. And in fact, that's one thing I screen, people when they come to me for their living environment, their working environment. I try to make sure that to the best of my ability that they live in a mold-free environment in
Hmm.
terms of an abundance of it. There's mold everywhere, but
Hmm.
we want to make sure that there's no mold in the walls, mold in the ceilings,
Hmm.
mold in the HVAC systems, things like this.
Hmm.
And because if people have mold behind a wall and you
Hmm.
can't see it,
Hmm.
they're not going to get better.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, in fact, that's happened before, and I've found that people have had mold, and once they've fix their mold issue, then they start to get better again.
Hmm.
It's mold is a big one. Yeah. I mean, I have a direct experience with it. We bought a house in Portland, and my son's room was built on a slab uh,
Hmm.
from an old garage, and the house was remodeled. Everything was new, and he moved in there, and I just got this very, very, very faint, almost like an intuitive smell of mildew in his room before we moved him in there. We moved him in there, and he started getting sniffly, and then he started sneezing all the time. At night he didn't sleep very good, and and then when I noticed that when he would leave his room, he'd feel better and his sniffles would go away. Then when he would go into his room during the day, he'd start getting sniffly, and
Hmm.
so then I was like, okay, this is not allergies. This is not moving to a new environment. This got to be something environmental in this room
Hmm.
because no place else in the house was he acting like this. So I was like, all right, you're, come in our room and sleep with us. And so, we moved him out and, I took off the sheetrock off all the exterior walls, removed the carpet, and lo and behold, I find black mold on all the studs, all the insulation, and I pull it all out. I kill all the black mold. I re-insulate, sheetrock, tape, mud, sand, texture, paint, recarpet, move him back in, and he was fine. So mold's a big one. I've treated a
Hmm.
lot of people with mold and mycotoxins. It's a beast, and it can
Hmm.
make people miserable.
Hmm.
So, make sure that your environment is mold free.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. I think we covered a lot today,
Yeah, I think so
and
too. It's been
I'm
fun.
sure we'll have many more future interviews with you on various topics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been great, and I look forward to, interviewing more doctors and learning more myself. I mean, this is a practice. You
Yep.
know, Practicing medicine is a practice, and we're always learning and getting better. And I've learned so much from Dr. Horowitz, God bless, and
Yeah.
Dr. Katya Ambrose and Dr. Lee Cowden, and God,
Dr. Levy.
Dr.
We've
Levy.
been really fortunate. This is an exciting series,
It really
and
is. Yes.
all of them, they all were excellent interviews, and they have so much to offer. And they've done a lot of work. They've been known for quite a while, but with
Yeah.
our interviews, a lot of them had a lot of new information that I found
Yeah.
very interesting and exciting for people looking for, help with chronic illness. They have a lot to offer. So hopefully everyone tunes in to see them all because they all have some wonderful nuggets of wisdom.
I agree. And I'll be watching them again myself because I recall those nuggets of wisdom in there that I need to integrate,
Hmm.
a little bit more. So
Hmm.
I'm going to go through and find out what those were and write them down and take some notes.
And we also have our special guests labeled the game changers on our home page. People in the wellness industry who also have, discovered some really helpful things that will be useful for people looking for health and wellness for their families. And,
Yeah.
we got some great interviews. We are talking with Sam Kaufman, a former Green Beret medic
Yeah.
who became
Yeah.
an herbalist. He has some fantastic advice in that. That was a great interview.
I
And
love him, man. He's a great guy, man. He's really devoted his life to service and
mhm.
he's done some really cool stuff.
Yeah, and then we're going to learn all about meditation for children, which, there's a lot of programs around, but
Yeah.
Janice Joya joins us with a very unique program called We Meditate, and I really love what she has to say and what this new platform she's created is going to do for parents on the go. That's one of the things I thought was very unique about that one. That one's on the go.
Oh yeah.
And last but not least, very, very interesting interview with Megan Mooney of the Death Cafe. I
Right.
have never heard of the Death Cafe movement until this year. And boy, that is going to be a very interesting interview as well. And learning about this trend that actually started in Europe and is now here in the United States.
Yeah, for sure. People who know that they're going to be, leaving their bodies soon
Hmm.
and trying to, you know, figure out how to get their affairs in order and, having a place to go do that and talk with other people and go to, seminars or, whatever they are. Um,
Hmm.
it definitely fits a certain type of individual. So yeah, it's good.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you once again, Patrick. And thank you to all of you who are watching. We hope you love Chronic Report. Please subscribe and stay tuned because we're going to get many more exciting interviews. And we hope to see you there.
That's right. And you know what? We are all about the root cause of and sustainers of disease and how
Mhm,
doctors are helping people identify those and get through it. And we are all about, just trying to help the world understand for people who are health minded how to live in this world
mhm,
as we know it right now with all the crazy things going on.
mhm.
And so, at any rate, it's good to be here. And thank you for the interview today, Nicole. And hope everyone has a great day. God bless.
God bless. Take care.